6, beginning in verse 1. It says, after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, so as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Now, one of the things I want to make sure that we pick up in the conversation is that Jesus took what was enough to feed one person and he fed thousands. Some people like to take the 5,000 and then they like to say, well, that's just men. And so there are also women and children, and that's awesome. I'm sure it was more than just the 5,000 men. But you know what? To me, I don't care if there was just one little boy's meal and he fed 10 people with it. One person's meal isn't enough for 10. It's not enough for 100. It's not enough for 500. It's not enough for 5,000. So what I understand here is that whatever you put in the hand of God that he has asked for is more than enough to feed your household. That when you don't have enough for everything that you need, when you give him what he asks, he will multiply it. You say, Shawn, I only have enough for 1 and there's 2 in my house. Your multiplication will be enough to feed 2. Shawn, I only have enough for 1 and there's 6 in my house. Your multiplication will be enough to feed 6. What I know is God is faithful and God will do what he has promised to do. And when you put in his hand that which he has asked for, he will multiply it and feed everybody you need him to feed. Why? Because he's just that good. God is faithful to do what he promised. And we can stop right there. But since it's Sunday morning, let's just dig in and go a little further. There's something here that we see that we are forced to understand is Jesus' awareness of timing. Was he the King of Kings? Yes. Was he the Lord of Lords? Yes. Is he the one who will stand and sit on the seat of David and rule the earth? Yes. But they wanted to make him king right then. And let me just say, you're not going to make God do anything that it is not time for him to do. We have sometimes gotten into a place where what we believe is discouraged because we think if I just have enough of it, whatever it is, I can make it happen today. But let me just say, if God's will is to move on your behalf tomorrow, what that means is the faith that you have today must hold on until he is ready to receive it, to give you that which you've asked for. It's not because you don't have enough faith. It's not because you don't believe. It might just be because it's not time yet. They were not going to make him be king that day. Why? Because it wasn't time. We see this throughout the book of John. In John 5, it said they wanted to stone him, but it wasn't time, so he slipped from their midst. In John 7, they wanted to do the same thing, but it wasn't time, so he slipped out among their midst. The same thing in John 8, the same thing in John 10. Why? Because it wasn't time. Did he come to destroy the works of the devil? Yes. Did he come to give his life as a sacrifice for the sins of mankind? Yes, but not on that day. On this day. And so now in John chapter 12 and verse 23, Jesus answered his disciples and he said, the hour has now come for the Son of Man to be glorified. In John 12, it was time. In John 5, it was not time. I just want to encourage you. Don't get frustrated. Your faith has not failed. You are not disappointing or displeasing God if you are doing what he's called you to do, if you are believing him to do the thing he promised to do, and it's just not happening yet. It's because it's just not time. So wait on him. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 1. What does it say? It says, for everything there is a season. And there is a time for every matter under heaven. You might be 4 months pregnant and you think, I can't do this. You got 5 months to go. It takes 9 months. Be glad you're not an elephant. It takes them 22 months. It's a dumb statement. Only a guy can make it, but whatever. Be patient. Don't you love that? The people that aren't dealing with what you're dealing with, they're always the ones that stand, hey, be patient, just wait on the Lord. And you're sitting there, I've been waiting for a year. Look, I get it. We all get it. But they weren't gonna force him to be king. It wasn't time yet. And there is something about our lives that we need to understand and discern, and that is seasons and timing. And we see how Jesus had such an awareness of time, because it said here, we see this pattern. He was going up to the mountain, but the crowds came. So they interrupted where he was going for what he was going for. And then when they sought to make him king, what did he do? He continued his journey and went on and did the thing that he had established that he was going to go do to begin with. What was that? Go up on top of the mountain and be to himself. There is something about our generation that has gotten, we're just not very good at getting to ourselves anymore. And we all know why. Distractions, this, that, but it's actually like it's true. I mean, I find myself sitting in line. Anybody ever go into a line, any kind, drive-through line, car line, any line, you're in a line. Me and Professor Denton, 2 of us in the whole room. So for you, let me talk to you for a minute. So when we're standing in line, what do we do? This is what we used to do. When I say used to, like just a few years ago, y'all, we'd look around. We'd see who was around us. We'd see what was going on. Who has needs, who doesn't have needs, who's lost, who's not lost. I can learn something from that person. We would just watch. We would learn and we would listen. Now, when I'm in line and all that's still around me, nothing's changed. But now I pull something out of my back pocket and I just start entertaining myself. Why? Because I don't like the silence anymore. I don't like the not being engaged anymore. And here is the thing. Your algorithm does not determine what God wants to say to you today. We have got to learn to be quiet in his presence so we can receive from him what he desires for us to have today. Does God use people? Yes. Can he use your algorithm? Yes. But it's not going to be in place of that quiet time, that invitation to just be in his presence and hear from him. We see this moment in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 11. Where the prophet was just frustrated. I mean, he had prayed. The people of God were being evil. He prayed that it would not rain. It wasn't raining. Now everybody was mad at him. Of course they're mad at him. He prayed that it wouldn't rain. It's not raining. They're hungry. They're starving. Their crops are dying. Nothing's working out, and it's all his fault because he prayed that it wouldn't rain. Now he turns around and prays again that it might rain, and it begins to rain. Guess what? The same people who hated him when it wasn't raining were the same people who hated him when it was raining. They didn't hate him because of the rain. They hated him because of the Spirit of the Lord that was upon him. Let me just say this to all of you. Please don't spin your wheels trying to make people who hate Jesus love you. If they hate Jesus, they're going to hate you. They have to love Jesus before they're going to love you. There is something about this desire to make the world love us. I just want the world to love Jesus. When they love him, they'll love everybody else that they need to. I want want to point them to him. If they don't like me because I'm pointing them to him, I can't help that. If they don't like me because I'm pointing them to his gospel, I can't help that. I'm not going to put his word down so that I can convince them to love me. If you hate Jesus, you're going to hate me. They hated him here when there was no rain. They still hated him after the rain. And he is having a frustrating moment. And he wants to see a sign. And so God says, fine, let me show you something. And there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. There was wind, but God was not in the wind. There was fire, but God was not in the fire. And then it said that the prophet heard the sound of a low whisper. And when he did, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice came to him and said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" He didn't hear that voice in the fire. He didn't hear it in the wind. He didn't hear it in the earthquake. And he definitely didn't hear it in the back end of the cave. But when he put himself in a place where God was going to speak to him, suddenly he heard the word of the Lord. When we turn the distractions off and we put ourselves in the place where he will speak to us, I promise you, he'll give you the direction you need. God will. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 6, Jesus said it like this: when you pray, he talked about the way everybody else prayed. Then he comes on, he says, but when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Now, something I want us to pay attention to here is that he uses the word see. He didn't say your Father who hears in secret. He said your Father who sees in secret. He's talking about somebody who has already said yes to Jesus. See, we need to make sure we can clearly define what are the posture, what are the things that we see in people who don't know him? How do we preach to them? But then when you're talking to a whole bunch of people who love Jesus, let's make sure we're talking to them the correct way. When somebody doesn't love Jesus, what they're doing doesn't matter. What God sees doesn't matter. Where they came from, none of it matters. Then one thing matters to the person that's out here living like an idiot outside of the love of God. One thing, that they call upon the name of the Lord. And when they call upon the name of the Lord, he hears them. It doesn't matter what he sees. There is nothing that you can do to earn the love of God. There is nothing that you can do to cause him to say yes to you. All that he is looking for here is to hear your voice say, Jesus is Lord. When he hears that, he picks you up from where you were and he places you here in his presence. When you are in his presence, now he's not only listening, now he's watching. In this place, in his presence, he hears and sees. You can get saved wherever, however, just in the middle of a mess with mud all over you. Just call upon the name of the Lord. Jesus is Lord, and he'll pick you up and turn you around and place your feet on solid ground, right? Like he takes you from here to here. But now what? Now he's watching you and he's listening. And when you put yourself in that place of prayer, that place of separation from the world, that place without distraction, and he sees that you have separated yourself from the noise, he knows you actually want to hear him. You want his voice because you turned everything else off. We need to learn to hear his voice, and that means we have to put ourselves in places where we can hear him. And so here in this moment, we see two disciples who did not know, they were not aware of what God was going to do, even though we see clearly Jesus knew what he was going to do. God knew what God was going to do. Philip and Andrew did not know. So how was God going to get them from where they were to be ready for what he was going to do? He was going to test them. And this is the part that sometimes in Christianity we can get a little frustrated by because we don't like tests. No one likes a test. Like, I don't know how you feel, but I don't like it when somebody's asking me something just to see what I'll say because they just want to test me. You're just trying me. That's all you're doing. You don't actually want to know. You just want to. Jesus asked them a question to do what? To test them. He wanted to know where their heart was. He wanted to know what they were going to say. He tested them. Guess what? God still tests you. God still tests me. This question takes us back all the way to a test that we see in the Old Testament, where they were desiring to be fed. Here they are in the New Testament, desiring to be fed. Here they are in the Old Testament, desiring to be fed. Here they were here. Did you just call us out here so that everybody would starve? Let's send them to go eat. It's the same thing they were seeing here. Did you just call us out here for everybody to just starve? He says, no, I'm going to feed you manna. And then we understand the purpose behind it in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 3. It said, God humbled you, and he let you hunger, that he might feed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. There are things in your generation that God needs to show you so you know how to handle things. I don't know if you're paying attention, but like the world is changing. When I was in grad school in 2007, the majority of my professors were boomers, teaching a whole bunch of us who were Gen Xers. They were teaching us from apps and from conversations and management theory that was very relevant to where the world was in 2007. The problem is it's 2026 and the rules have changed. The things that used to be said that people used to agree with, they don't agree with anymore. And so we have to find better arguments. We have to find better conversations. I'm watching the State of the Union the other night, and the president saying something that every president before him has said. Now half the room is excited about it, and half the room isn't excited about it. Now that was unique, because you can pull up the same thing being said by multiple presidents before him and the entire room would stand up. What's different? Because it's not 2008 anymore, and it's not 1996 anymore. It's 2026 now. And the president, he gets frustrated. He's like, these people are crazy. And the thing is, you can be around people who are managers or their bosses or their parents, and what's everybody saying? These kids are crazy. My team is crazy. Like what? No. Nobody's crazy. Everything's just changed. And we haven't been given the tools that are necessary to make a dent in the world where we are living. So when our fathers didn't know it and we don't know it, we have to submit ourselves to him, because guess who knows how to handle the problems of this generation? The people before you, your mentors, your leaders, your parents, they may not have been able to give you the tools for right now. They gave you the tools to get you to right now, but where you are right now is different, and you need to spend time in his presence so you can hear his voice, so you know how to work doing what you're doing today. Because I'm just telling you, it's a different world. Look, I understand what I'm called to as a parent. There are foundations that I need to pour into them. I need to raise them up in such a way where Jesus Christ is fully formed in them. But what I also know is I have to connect them to his voice and connect them to his presence, because as they move on in their lives, they will face things that I didn't prepare them for because I didn't know. I didn't know how, because I didn't know. But guess who does know? The only one that I can connect them to, who will always have the answer, is him. So just like John the Baptist came to a place in his leadership where he said, I must decrease that Jesus might increase. Parents, let me just tell you, there will be a day where you have to come to the place where you decrease that he might increase, because you're not always going to have the answer. And sometimes your answer can confuse them because you're answering from something that you understood a decade ago, but it's not then anymore, it's now. And now your voice, rather than encouraging them, look, you need to go get in front of Jesus. You need to go spend time with Jesus. Quit giving them counsel because you don't know what to do anymore. What you need to counsel them to do is go find Jesus for themselves so he can tell them. We need to know when our counsel isn't enough so we can push people to him. He said, you didn't know, nor did your fathers know, but I needed you to know that man doesn't live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Look at the whole process. There was a moment where Moses held a stick out and the water crossed. There was a moment where Moses hit a rock with a stick and water came out. And then he gets to the end, he says, no, don't hit that, don't hit it. Speak to it. But he didn't. He didn't listen to the word of the Lord. There was a generation that wasn't willing to cross the river Jordan to go into the promised land because when they were tested, they didn't grow. When they were tested, they didn't mature. God gave them everything they needed to receive in the answer to the test, but they blew him off. And when they came to the moment where God was gonna do what God was always going to do, they didn't step into the promised land because they weren't ready. I just want you to know whatever God is asking you to do today, he prepared you for. But if you didn't pass the test, you may not have discerned that this was something you needed to learn. There are many times in our lives where we're just not trusting God. There are many times in our lives where we think, oh, the devil's just coming again. No, the devil's not coming against you. This is just a moment where the thing God promised you isn't gonna show up because your faith has to last 3 minutes instead of 3 seconds. This is just a moment you're gonna have to wait a little bit because your faith doesn't need to last 3 days. It just might need to last 3 years. So stop giving up, stop quitting early. Whatever faith you hold tight. God will do it because he promised to do it. But right now, he just might be testing you. But that testing produces perseverance. And when perseverance has its perfect work, you will be complete, lacking nothing. Nothing. And so here we see this moment where their faith was being tested when God knew exactly what he was going to do. If we'll spend time in his presence, we'll understand some things. Let me push on with this one. There's something to be seen here about fragments that is powerful, that quite frankly, the knowledge of is being tested hugely in our generation. Let me do this. Everybody in the field, I just want to establish something here. There was much grass, so there was plenty of room for the thousands of people who were there, who were from the towns surrounding the Sea of Galilee. So they were Jewish people, and they were there just before the Passover, that was celebrated by Jewish people. Romans didn't celebrate the Passover. Jewish people celebrated the Passover. God's people were here. He was gathering them here in order to feed them. When they ate and they were full, then there were fragments that were left over. And I don't want us to miss the significance of the fragments, but in order to understand this, I need you to realize that it was the Jewish people who were all sitting on the grass being fed. If we look in prophetic literature of the Old Testament today and in the New Testament today, what we are forced to understand is a prophetic timeline involving both land and people. Before God ever called Abraham and made him a great nation, he chose land for himself. He told Abraham, I want you to leave where you are and go to a land that I will choose for you. In other words, this land, this land's builder and maker is God. The land was chosen before the people. God chose a land and he chose a people and put them in it. In the same way that if we go back to the Garden of Eden, God planted a garden and then he put a man in it. He prepared the land and then he chose who he would put there. If we miss this point, we're going to miss what God is doing in our generation, and we will have a worldview and ideas that are against the move of God. So let's sort of walk through this. So God chooses a land. He puts a people there. The land is the land of Israel. God's people, the Jewish people, are here. Here they are. They rebel and they're scattered. He brings them back. They rebel, they're scattered. He brings them back. Now we come to a prophetic moment where he says there will be a last scattering and there will be a final bringing them back. We see this in Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 4. The prophet says in that day. So that day is a prophetic day forward, not the day that is. So to the prophet Zechariah, he says, on that day, the Lord will stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem to the east. And the Mount of Olives will be split into two from east to west. And the Lord will rule over all the earth. And on that day, the Lord will be one and his name one. O-N-E, not W-O-N. His name one, he will be one. So we see that there is this prophesied moment where the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords will descend and stand on the Mount of Olives, just to the east side of Jerusalem. Now, there would be people who would say, well, that was fulfilled because Jesus came and he was on the Mount of Olives and he walked down and then he walked into the city of Jerusalem. That is true. Jesus did all of that. And when he did that as the Lamb of God who was prophesied to take away the sins of the world. He did not come into Jerusalem to rule the world. He came into Jerusalem to save the world. We then realize that the promise for Jesus to return to the Mount of Olives remains because once Jesus saved the world, meaning when he was crucified for the sins of mankind, that in that 40 days later, now he comes and meets his disciples on the Mount of Olives. While they're there, he ascends. He's taken up to heaven. They're standing there looking up. Then an angel appeared to them in Acts chapter 1 and verse 11 and said, why are you guys staring into heaven? For this Jesus who was taken up from you will come again in the same way that you saw him taken up. So the promise of Jesus coming to the Mount of Olives that was given in Zechariah is repeated in Acts chapter 1. What that means is the first time he walked into the city to save the world was not the fulfillment of the promise when he will come onto the Mount of Olives to rule the world. So there is a promise that remains. If the promise remains that he will come upon the Mount of Olives, that is where God has chosen, then God has not taken his choice of the land of Israel away. His choice that is his remains. Now he gets to decide who will live there in his land. So are there prophecies that suggest that? Absolutely. God prophesied that he would scatter in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, that he would scatter, Jesus said the same thing in Matthew, that he would scatter all of God's people. They would be taken out of their land away. And then there would be a time when he would bring them back. And when he brings them back, that will be the precursor that will allow us to discern the time where he's going to come stand on the Mount of Olives, and there's going to be a splitting of the mountain. He's going to go into the city, and when he comes in, he's not coming to die for us, he's coming to rule the world. that is prophesied into the future. If we take away the boundary of the land and we take away the people who God has called there, what we're doing is we're chiseling away at our willingness to believe that God will do the thing that he promised to do. When we start being distracted by all the noise that is anti-gospel, I dare say anti-Christ, when we become a part of the noise, we're no longer looking for prophecy to be fulfilled. When you start dropping prophecy to be fulfilled, you'll start dropping other scriptures from their fulfillment. And what happens is we will find ourselves just living in this world where we are not living according to the gospel of God, but rather we're living according to the world's words. And this is the problem, because in church, and I've been one of those too, let me just say, I think probably every preacher to some degree has, because if you went through certain years, you were trying to navigate, what am I supposed to say or not say? But what has happened over the last decades, there has been an uprising of preachers unwilling to preach the fullness of the gospel. So what has happened is people have gone into a slumber, we've gone into a sleep, and we're not ready for these things. So now the world is talking about hating the nation of Israel, and the church for the very first time has become haters of the nation of Israel that God said he was going to raise up for the purpose of his coming. So now the church isn't looking for his coming anymore. We've just decided, hey, we'll just fill the room up with a whole bunch of people that are just cool, but they don't believe anything. Let me tell you something. That's not what this house is. This house is God's house, where he is bringing in his people who will worship him, his people who will magnify him, his people who will fill his house with prayer, his people who will desire spiritual gifts, manifestations of the Spirit, his people who will not settle for anything other than the preaching of the gospel. Because I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. So when we understand this and we see this, now we have the capacity to argue the modern argument with ancient words that have yet to be fulfilled. So let's just walk through the timeline, because here's the crankiness today that I'm hearing in church. God hasn't chosen that land. That land was fulfilled, its purpose was fulfilled, and it doesn't matter anymore. The people who are there calling themselves Jews aren't really Jews. And so we don't need to be in a place where we're looking for God to do anything there with them. So now we're no longer fulfilling what the Psalms tell us to do, is to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We're no longer doing what Paul told us to do, that our prayer would be that all Israel would be saved. We're now not fulfilling certain basic tenets of Scripture that are all precursors to the coming of Jesus. So now we're not actually looking for him. Because people have started arguing and they've started saying, oh, no, it's just a promise in Genesis 15 about the land. How about we go all the way into the book of Revelation, the last book of your Bible, when what has been prophesied is a vision that John sees. John sees the end moment in time. And the end moment in time is this. There's a picture in heaven and there's a picture on earth. And the picture on earth, not in heaven, the picture on earth is that there are 12 tribes from the nation of Israel. And from those 12 tribes, there are 12,000. In other words, every single person in this tribe, and every single person in this tribe, and this tribe, and this tribe, all 12, they will all be marked as God's people. They will be marked in the same way that we are marked. They will not be marked because they've decided to turn to the law. They will not be marked because they have decided to open up sacrifice again. They will be marked because they have seen the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And in their seeing the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, they say, oh, we missed it. Now we see. They bow their knee. They say, Jesus is Lord, and they are marked. Now, when are they marked? They're marked at the beginning of a period of time that is called the tribulation. This is what John is seeing. He sees on the earth all of Israel being saved in fulfillment of what the Apostle Paul said. But he also looks up and he sees something in heaven. And what he sees in heaven is not the tribes of the nation of Israel, but rather in heaven he says, I saw a crowd from every nation, from every tribe, from every language. And they were all up there. And then God's people We're all down here. We sometimes miss these things, like in Matthew chapter 20, when Jesus said, here, I'll pay you $10 to work 8 hours. And then the last group, he said, I'll pay you $10 to work 1 hour. And then they get to the end, and the group of people that had only been around for an hour, he gave them their $10. The people that were around for 8 hours, he gave them their $10. These people started complaining, and he said, I'll have mercy on whom I want to have mercy. Will you judge me for my generosity? But just understand, the last will be first, and the first will be last. And so we see in this picture, the group of people whom God chose first are actually the last to get in, but the group of people that he chose last are actually the first to get in. Because while they're still on the earth, there's a group of people called the church who are in heaven. So we see the fulfillment of the prophecy that the last will be first and the first will be last. But if we deny that there are a people who are first, then we reject that they will be saved. Please let us not come to that place. Please let us not come to a place where we are rejecting their land. It blows my mind. This is what blows my mind. When everybody hated the Jews after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD up to about 130, and they scattered them all over the place, everybody knew who a Jew was. There's no confusion. And then we get to the 1100s with the Crusades, where they're killing thousands of Jews. Everybody knew who the Jews were then. And we jump into the 1300s, and we have this moment where England kicked all the Jews out, and then France kicked all the Jews out, and then Spain and Portugal kicked all the Jews out, and then we get to the 1930s, and what do we see here? Where Germany says, anybody who's a Jew can't hold a government position anymore. And then, oh, by the way, we're gonna take citizenship from all the Jews already, it's all gone. How come everybody knew who was a Jew then? It's like they existed when they were there to be persecuted, but then all of a sudden in 1948, when God said, oh, I'm gonna give you your land back, according to prophecy, I scattered you that you would be persecuted, but now I'm going to gather you back. Now all of a sudden, when the people who were scattered and persecuted start coming back, everybody's like, oh, they're not Jews. Well, they were Jews when millions of them were killed in gas chambers. Now all of a sudden, they're not. What we don't understand is there is a prejudice against God's people. And when we hate God's people, we won't love any of God's people. We will come to a place where we just want to start dividing and no, you're not, no, and no, and no. But this is where we have to understand the fragments. Don't miss the fragments. Because he fed everybody from the house of Israel. And then there were fragments. And that word, you got to double click on it. And it's going to take you to a moment in Matthew 15 where Jesus was at his table with the house of God. And there was a lady from Canaan, a Canaanite. I don't know if you remember the Canaanites, but nobody liked them. Nobody liked the Canaanites. And she comes in and she bows her knee. And she says, Lord, every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. She says, Lord, help me. And Jesus says, it is not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. And she says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the fragments that fall from the master's table. You might not have been first, but thank God for last. Because once he fed all his people, there was more than enough left over to feed all of us. And the last shall be first. And if God had a blessing for them, God has a blessing for you. If God had something for them, God has something for you. May his name be praised in this house.